Hello, I'm Sean Sprague, Sonia's younger brother by 7 years. Sorry I couldn't make it today, but I'd like to share a few memories of my dear and beloved sister. She was born in Wales, September 1939. Sonia was what you might call a war baby, as she was born just 2 weeks after the outbreak of the Second World War. Our father Hayden was drafted into the army for almost 5 years and returned only a couple of times on home leave. He spent those years in the Middle East, North Africa and Italy. His wife Audrey and baby Sonia were left alone, living in their house in Llandaff, a suburb of Cardiff. It was a lonely and dangerous time for the young mother and child. During the Blitz of 1941, a German bomb was dropped on the historic Llandaff Cathedral, which lay only 200 yards away over the garden wall. While Sonia and her mother hunkered down in a tiny bomb shelter at the bottom of the garden, fragments of masonry landed nearby, although thankfully they were not hurt. Those early years of danger, wartime rationing and poverty must have left a mark on Sonia as well as Audrey and the entire population. Dark times, but the future would be bright. Father Hayden returned intact from the war, started a grocery business, while Audrey was also a school teacher. They gave birth to me in 1947. While Sonia was a war baby, I was a baby boomer. We lived in a cul-de-sac with friendly neighbours and lots of young children who played together. A black and white photo shows us all crammed into a homemade cart with pram wheels. Sonia was usually in charge. My caring sister took me to the museum, parks, even on a paddle steamer day trip across the Bristol Channel. We adored each other, big sis SONJA and me. The family prospered. Our parents were the first to buy a black and white TV in 1953. All the neighbours came to watch the Queen's coronation. An early memory our mother used to retell over and over was about young Sonia being a naughty girl who stole flowers from the graveyard. She was taken to the village police station to be softly reprimanded by a friendly Bobby. We both attended the gloomy Victorian Gothic Llandaff Infant School, and so did an older boy, David Cowie, who would figure big time in Sonia's later life. A girl named Anne went to the same school. All in different years, they didn't know each other yet. Anne would one day marry David. And so would Sonia. Sonia attended Cardiff High School for Girls, commuting on her bicycle. Meanwhile, a certain Michael Walden, a few years older and unknown to Sonia, attended the boys' version of the same school. Those Cardiff children could not imagine what future entanglements were in store, that they would all end up in DC or Baltimore, that Michael and David in turn would be blessed to marry beautiful Sonia. In her teen years, Sonia became ever more beautiful, growing into a glamour icon as the years went by. Or so she seemed to me. I was so proud of my beautiful sis. She went to Teachers Training College in Portsmouth. After that, she taught at a preparatory school in England and bought her first car, an old banger which kept breaking down. Then she met that Michael Walden, her first big love. They married and created James. Then a big break came for the young family. Michael, a trained accountant, landed a job in the World Bank in Washington, D.C. They uprooted and headed off to America in 1966, just a couple of months before James was born. Guy came a couple of years later. I saw Sonia occasionally over the next decade on her home visits to the old country, sometimes with the boys. Then it was time for me to make my first visit to the US in 1976 and see how my sister was doing. Sonia and Michael and the boys lived in a grand house in Bethesda, Maryland, on the outskirts of DC. I was impressed. 10 years in and they were doing well. I loved the huge red Ford Fairlane convertible, the roof down while the AC was on full blast in tropical August, off to the beach house in Rehoboth. Sonia and Michael were always true Brits, but well integrated into Americana. Sonia's Welsh accent was already transatlantic by then, while Michael's was more a posh British drawl. Both had wicked senses of humour, Michael non-stop. It was the Monty Python era, littered with dead parrot jokes, nudge nudge, say no more. The World Bank job gave generous travel junkets to Michael, Sonia and the boys. They jet-setted all over the world, sometimes quite classy, sailing on the QE2 out and flying Concorde back. They had some stomping great parties. Myself, I didn't know what a Harvey Wallbanger was until I stayed with the Waldens. Orange juice, vodka and amaretto, flowing fast. Memory is now blurred, but I remember people, probably Sonia, dancing on the tables. Nevertheless, I met serious, prominent people at the parties, such as World Bank executives or a man from the CIA. Young Jim and Guy were not usually downstairs when the partying took place. They had their own TVs and toys up in their bedrooms and stayed clear. I was just a backpacker passing through on his way to Latin America. We got on very well as brother and sister, but then the differences which 7 years make were apparent. In our teens, while she was a 50s jiving girl, rock around the clock, I was more 60s, Jefferson Airplane, just back from Kathmandu and a bit stoned. Sonia and her husbands were quite straight, while I wasn't. But we shared and respected our differences, and as time went by we enjoyed our similarities, forever sharing that British sense of humour, watching repeatedly the TV comedy series Absolutely Fabulous, AbFab, in which Sonia saw herself in the champagne-swigging model Patsy. We were always laughing. It was such a joy to be together. Sonia taught at the Washington International School, became principal of their middle school and drove the Beltway every day. Then back home for tennis with Michael. Oh, what a girl she was. Our Sonia. Several years later I came to stay with them again, and Sonia dropped a bombshell. At a big party over at the house of their friends, David and Anne Cowie, Sonia confided in me. She was having an affair with David, and they intended to get married after divorcing their respective spouses. Wow. She discreetly pointed out David across a room full of people. At that juncture, I was apparently the only one who knew. I felt a warm glow inside that my sister confided in me like that. Brother and sister, such trust and love. I didn't know why she'd finished with the old bloke, Michael. I liked him. But anyway, here came David, her new star, and a very lucky guy indeed to have bagged my sister. I was happy for my sister. Sonia explained, David really gets into my head. Sonia and David married, moved into a house in Columbia, Maryland, and lived happily together for about the next 40 years. I moved to Mendocino, California in 1980. During that time, nephew Jim came to stay for a couple of years to attend the local community school. His mom came at different times to visit, sometimes with Guy and David, while his dad Michael came at different times. Both parents were happy at how well Jim was doing in the West Coast, alternative, counterculture, hippie enclave where we lived, although I think it might have been a culture shock for them. Sonia commented how haggard the women looked. But I explained that the women of Mendocino don't usually wear makeup, let alone high heels. By 2000, I moved back to Wales. Our mother, Audrey, had passed away, and Sonia and David ended up owning her flat in Cardiff, which they used for occasional visits. They were a glamorous, globe-trotting pair, their Cardiff flat used as a base for further excursions deeper into Europe. And then there were the cruises and long-haul trips, always with an educational slant, all over the world. While in residence in Cardiff, they would come to Mid Wales to visit me. It was a good life, although Sonia often said she wished David had retired earlier, like she had done, so they could have had even more fun together. Those good years continued until their last visit in September 2016. Sonia was getting forgetful and David had his health problems. It was touch and go for their last month in Cardiff. So I came down to help out. A friend drove them to Heathrow. They were wheelchaired to the plane and family members met them the other end in Baltimore. Their last years of decline were a bit sad. David going first and then Sonia surviving for a few more. Her comfortable ending was at the excellent care home near Portland, with weekly visits by Guy, who lived nearby, and regular visits by Jim, who flew over from New York, as well as granddaughter Angelina, her mum Helen, and Jim's girlfriend Karen. Sonia died peacefully in her sleep. It's sad when people pass, especially if you dwell on their final years, but once they've gone you see the big picture, the whole life. What remains in my memory are those earliest years and the good times we had. Beautiful, kind, bright, generous, full of fun. Sonia, rest in peace.